Hey everyone, what we have here is a CVO FatBoy 2 from 2006. It's been sitting up for about 2 years now. It belongs to a friend of mine and at the time had recently purchased it, and it ran fine, and then he was riding in the hot weather and it was stopped either at traffic or whatnot and got really hot, and then it started to surge, and then he limped it home and that was it. I told him not to run it again, that we should have a look at it and to at least leave it on the tender so the battery doesn't go flat and, you know, life gets in the way. But finally, here we are, and this is the first time I'm getting a chance to look at this bike because I've never seen it before. So let's dive right in, see what's wrong, and get this fat boy back on the road. First order of business is going to be removing the 2 years of sitting in the garage and collecting dust. And there's a fine line between removing the dust and dirt on the bike and removing any evidence of a previous problem. But I've already gone over the bike to see if that was the case before I started cleaning. And problems are immediately evident. I see something like this. I just can't imagine this. This is insulating the rear cylinder. I guess it keeps heat off your legs or something, but this will completely destroy the engine. And there's a second one under it right here. So I was very surprised when I saw this. The other side as well, we could see the heat has already caused stress cracks in that plastic chrome over here. That's crazy. Here, that looks like one of those earplugs, and we could see some oil leakage right here on the rocker boxes. That's enough. Let's get this on the lift. I'll need to fill the tires up to be able to push it on my lift, so I'll do that now. And there's these weird lights that go on the stems. These look like they're way past their service life. And today I'm filling up the tires to the maximum allowable pressure because I am the only one here today to push it up on the lift. And the more pressure, the easier it is to get it up on here. I've made many repairs on this Kendon lift. The bike is then strapped in on both sides for safety, and I'd accidentally broken my air fitting, so I'm going to have to jack it up manually. For today's work, I jacked it up to the lowest possible locking level. Our initial focus will be engine damage or viability, and I know I'm going to need a full battery for this, so we're going to put it on a tender and see if that battery is still any good. We're going to come back tomorrow, see if that orange light changes. The battery's good. We can see that it's green, so we're going to remove the seat so we could get at the fuses. One Torx bolt, a T27, holds the rear of the seat in, and as I go to loosen it, I can see that is like finger tight. It's not tight at all. I'm going to keep that in mind that the first bolt I found was loose. Make sure to keep all parts and bolts in order as you take them off. Lifting first from the rear and then pulling back. The whole seat comes right off of the motorcycle. Put it off to the side. This heat shield was held on by the seat. We're just going to get rid of it. The cables under here are an absolute mess. We're going to have to make heads or tails of what's going on here. For now, we want to focus on the fuse box because I want to remove the fuse for the fuel pump. And there it is, hidden under all that. So as I remove it, we could see an indication of where it's located. All the way in the middle on the far right is the 15 amp fuel pump. We don't want the pump to run when I cycle the engine with all the dirty gas. So we're going to rip that out, and now we're good to go. Next is the removal of the spark plugs and obviously the cables, and I got all the stuff in the way. This right here, I don't even know what this is. It could be a switch or a sensor or a light. Let's pull that off and pull it out of the way. Whatever it is, it's melted. That's for sure. Because it's a short run, I could see right here that one side is going to fuse power straight to the battery. The other cable is coming off here to a terminal block going to a bunch of green cables, so it's probably a switch. Switched hot power, shorted and melted to the side of the engine. So I was going to continue pulling this cable off, and this shield is getting in my way. I don't even want this thing on here, so I'm going to pull this cable off, but the shield is gone. Take the other cable off first. Looks like just 2 bolts are holding the shield onto this mounting bracket. It's a 1/4 inch hex, so securing the bottom of it, I'll just turn them right out. We'll get rid of this thing. The bike is breathing a sigh of relief. We can see it leaking under the seals of the rocker boxes over here at the back of the engine, probably due to excessive heat. We'll pull the plug now with a 5/8 spark plug socket. I should probably hit this plug well with some air first. Just to blow any debris out of the way. It's been sitting for a couple of years. And then I'll continue. And that plug won't be going back in. Just a lot of rust on the base of the plug, but you can see the one on the right, the rear plug, was just running a lot hotter than the one on the left. The cylinders and rings haven't seen oil for a while, so I'm going to spray some fogging oil down into the spark plug holes on each side. I'm going to let it sit there for several minutes. Look how the heat shield made the glass so hot on the thermostat that the glass cracked. I pull the dipstick out, and I'm seeing nothing at all, which is a little alarming. For whatever reason, I go and check again to see if oil magically appears. I don't know why I did that. I can't see to the bottom of the horseshoe tanks, but from what I see, I don't see any oil. Now, in a shovel head, it's a common problem that after sitting for a while, this will all drain past the check valve into the case and it'll wet sump, ultimately blowing out the breather on the bottom of the engine. This bike is either burning a ton of oil or wet sumping when running, possibly due to overheating. We'll find out when we open the air filter. I'm going to add 2 quarts of 20W50 just to get things going and ensure that there's oil in the system. And we can see now that I got my oil in there, so I'm safe to operate. As I hit the starter, we could see oil coming from the top down. It is recirculating, so I am confident that at least we have oil getting through the system. We could continue. The cylinder's now repositioned from the starter. I hit it with a little more fogging oil, and then I wait another 10 minutes. And I repeat this procedure one last time. After this, I'm going to wait another 10 minutes. In the meantime, I'll find some other stuff to do. So I peeled back on this glob of crap, and as we see, it was in fact at one time a switch. So the mystery was solved, though we kind of knew what it was. All this work brings us to our first goal, the cold compression test. I'll run the engine a few seconds to blow out any extra oil that I had sprayed in before. And now I'll insert the brass fitting for the compression tester, followed by the compression tester itself. I do so in this order so I don't strip out the threads inadvertently on the motorcycle. Check the gauge and make sure everything looks good. I then turned the throttle to wide open and locked it. And we're looking at 150 foot-pounds, give or take. Onto the front cylinder. Again, 150, a deviation of 0%. I'm not seeing any major problems here, so we can continue with our project. Let's have a look in this mostly full gas tank after 2 years. Not awesome. This gas has to go. I'm going to draw it out with a siphon pump. Once I get it started, gravity will do the rest. And that's kind of most of it. Placing a towel down under the quick disconnect fitting, I'll push up and down on the connector to remove it, and it will stop the flow of gas here as the connector comes out. I stopped for a moment to remove that other heat shield, and my friend had told me to remove all of them and don't put them back on, so the shields are coming off with the associated brackets. Let's see what's hiding under this one. And it's no surprise from this side we get a good view of the rocker box leaking from that gasket up there, just around the fins and above the exhaust pipe. By comparison, we'll look at the same thing on the front cylinder, and we can see very little to no leakage at all, though this is in the wind and stays a lot cooler than the back one. I'll pull the air cleaner next. This hex bolt will come out. It's 5/16. Again, a lot looser than I would expect it to be. Place the bolt and cover off to the side, and we'll have a look at this filter. Yeah, this filter's finished. I mean, it could be cleaned, but nah, we're going to replace this one. We're going to start servicing new. The bottom is completely soaked with oil. So with the 27 Torx, I'll take out these 3 bolts. And they are essentially holding on this air filter assembly, which should start to fall off as the bolts become loose. And I'll remove all this as a unit and put it off to the side. We can see the oil just dripping off this thing. And that's coming from the breather, probably from wet sumping, as previously discussed. And the throttle's still locked open from compression testing. I'll loosen that lock now and flip it a couple times. Now it's closed. These aftermarket wires for the lights are going to inhibit our removal of the tank. Also, these aftermarket brackets got to go, held on by the tank screw over here as well to get this tank off. And this screw is Torx. It's a T40. And as I put the ratchet on again and go to give it a turn, this thing is completely loose. It's like hand turn. And I'm only going to turn it just a little. I don't want to remove it yet. For this front bolt, I'll have a ratchet on each side. One is deep well. And both of these are 9/16, just loosened a couple of turns right now. A 1/2 inch deep well is used for the top of the speedometer. And that one was loose as well. Remove the nut and washer. And a T25 will remove the screw holding this tank apron. Also loose. There's a washer on top here that I remove. And then this whole piece peels off carefully from the tank. I can now lift up the whole speedo cluster, and this would have been easier if the lift was not raised. I got through it anyway though. There are several cable connections under here that need to be disconnected. So I'm just going one by one and carefully pulling out those cables. We can see this one down here is also dressed in, so that needs to be removed from the side. Then we have this one up top. And then finally I have to remove this rubber outer molding to unscrew this so that this connection can be removed from the inside. And that's it. There's a crossover tube that goes under the gas tank. I picked the side whose clamp was easiest to remove as they are factory clamps. And we can see this one is facing outward, which is why I chose it. Using a pair of snips, I'm able to twist it back and forth to make it loose and then get under it and peel it off that top clasp, ultimately straightening it out and removing this clamp from the hose. Now I'm able to just gently pull it straight and off the hose. And I'm being careful as I do this. I don't need to go and scratch a gas tank with a clamp just because I'm working too fast. I just want to emphasize that right here is not the bottom of the fuel tank like a carbureted motorcycle. This is a hose that goes up to the fuel pump. So even though this is empty right here, the tank can be completely full with gasoline. With that said, you better have a cap and plug on hand for both sides of this hose, even if you think you drained the tank. With a pair of bent needle nose pliers, I grab this hose and gently start twisting it back and forth to separate it from the metal pipe. And it does take some work because it needs to be separated before I can pull it out. I had siphoned enough that gas did not come out the hose I removed, but you could be sure it came out this bottom fitting right here, for which I've added an extra length of hose for draining. And I did pour that into a gas can. That's why I used a rubber hose. That hose, nothing really came out of, so there was no problem at all, the crossover hose. But this one, you could be sure there was about 1/4 gallon that came out. And for the time it took to transition everything, I had a towel under here, so no worries at all. No mess was made. You try and do this with a full tank and forget, you can have a really bad day. Our last hose connection is this vent line up here. We're going to use the pliers once again just to twist it and loosen it off the metal, and then we'll be able to pull down and twist to remove it. And as it came down, I see an excess of rust from moisture here, so we're going to address that later because that is obviously an issue. Now we can put our two 9/16 ratchets back on and remove this bolt in its entirety. Once it's loose and one side comes off, or falls off, remove that washer and push it through with our finger. The bolt is then pulled out the other side and put off to the side. Now I'll come to this front tank bolt and completely remove it, which I can finger turn. It came off with the washer. Gently lifting the tank, I'll now remove that metal bracket and let the tank fall back down. We could see the tank was actually supposed to sit lower than it did. The bracket actually raised it. I'll now pull the crossover hose through the side that wasn't disconnected, so it is no longer under the frame, and just let it rest here. So I heard back from my friend and he said rip all those old lights out. No problem at all. So we're just going to snip them right now and deal with it later. That will allow us to clean up a lot of this spaghetti after the tank is removed. We can see I can now lift the tank from the rear. It's floating on that rubber mount up front. I'm going to come around the other side for our last connection. And as I lift it up, there's one connector under there. It's kind of hard to see, but it's the fuel gauge sending unit cable. And I'm just going to disconnect that right over here and then unlatch its holder on this side. And with that done, there's nothing left holding the tank in. The whole tank could be lifted back, sort of shimmed back off the rubber and then released. Not only can we now inspect and clean the tank, but we also now have access to the idle air control valve, a common culprit in idle surging. But before I go any further, I'm going to remove all these lights and associated cables. It'll definitely make my job easier as they don't belong here. This one was actually stuck to the back of the air filter, so it held. And I could start pulling these cables back through, removing these cable ties as I find them, work my way back further, and make sure I don't clip anything that isn't part of this light circuit. But we could clearly see, disconnect them from these connectors, separate them all so they could be traced, and start removing what we can. As I take apart this side, approaching the switch, I'll remove that fuse in the switch so I don't have to worry about shorting anything out as I cut the cable, allowing that melted switch to be removed. I'll take that unnecessary connection off of ground, which should be disconnected anyway, I know, but I wanted to keep it connected for other reasons. Generally, the bike should be disconnected from ground when you're working on the bike or any associated electrics, but I do have a reason as I'm testing through stuff. Another light was found just dangling on top of the transmission, wasn't connected to anything, so I'll just rip that one right out, and it's gone. We're down to one, but I still have to loosen these bolts here to remove the remainder of those mounting brackets here. So I'm going to do that now. Just slightly loosening with a 1/2 inch, I could slide them out, and then I'll tighten that bolt right back down. And then I'll snug it. Repeat the same thing on the other bolt. Just a turn, pull it out, and then tighten the bolt right back down. And with that, all of those heat shields and mounting brackets are officially gone from this motorcycle. I found movement in the last cable, and I'm making my way forward with it. Seems to go under here where the horn is. There's a cable tie right there. Pull that through. Snip off that cable tie, and this bike is getting lighter and lighter by the minute. Pull it through again, and I now see where that light is, so I'll just peel it right off. After cutting this last cable tie, the last light is now removed. This cable's for 5-volt DC power, so I'm going to leave that one alone. And as I clip this cable tie back here, I see 3 different fuse connections merging into one that are no longer used, except for one on the end, as we'll see. This one in black right here with the yellow fuse goes to a relay and straight to positive on the battery. The other ones are not even used anymore, so they could be cut out of this system. So I'll disconnect all these connections from the positive terminal, making sure not to drop anything. And I cut back this heat shrink here to see if I could get a little more cable out of this black cable I'm going to save. And when I pull it off, I see that the wires just crumpled together and heat shrinked. There's nothing actually connecting these cables. Definite fire hazard. So I'll clip off these old cables and do away with it. And that's what we're working with. Screw everything back down, and I'm using a screwdriver again. I'm not tightening it down onto the battery because I keep tightening and removing stuff for more electrical work down the road, so it's just temporary to hold everything on. And that's it. This sort of cleans everything up, especially right here on the front of the battery. Everything's looking good. The back portion is going to need a little more work, but I'm going to wait till the fuse box covers back on before I tackle the rest of that. Further inspection found that the rear brakes are almost completely used up. Maybe a couple miles left on there, so we're going to replace those and flush the rear brakes. The front brakes still got some life on them, so all we're going to do is flush the front, but we're not going to replace the pads just yet. So it's time to put in my first order and wait for parts to arrive. So I'll put the bike back on the tender and start editing this video. And that concludes part 1 in this series of troubleshooting, repairing, and putting this CVO2 back on the road after a couple of years. I hope you found this video enjoyable, entertaining, and informative. Do me a favor, hit that like button down below, helps me out a lot when you do, and hit that subscribe button to get more videos like this when they come out. When the next video comes out in the series, a link will be posted in the top right corner. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Would you like to reply?